The Whispering Dollhouse. The manor at the edge of town was a place of whispers and shadows, a grand old house whose best days had long since passed. Its walls, once vibrant with color, were now faded and peeling, the tapestries hanging limp with dust. The windows, streaked with grime, let in only slivers of light, casting the once grand rooms into a perpetual twilight. The villagers spoke of the manor in hushed tones, passing on stories of its former grandeur and the tragic fate of the family that had once called it home. But the truth of what lay within the manor was a secret known only to the walls that had witnessed it all. Eliza was a curious girl of 12, with bright eyes that missed nothing and a mind that was always seeking out the hidden and the mysterious. When her family moved into the manor, she saw it not as a place of decay, but as a world of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Her parents, busy with their own lives, paid little attention to the manor's many rooms, leaving Eliza to explore its dusty corridors and forgotten chambers at her leisure. It was on one of these solitary explorations that Eliza found the attic. The entrance was hidden behind a door at the end of a narrow, winding staircase, nearly invisible beneath layers of dust and cobwebs. The door creaked ominously as she pushed it open, revealing a space that had clearly been untouched for decades. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories, and the only light came from a single, grimy window that cast long shadows across the floor. The attic was cluttered with old trunks and forgotten treasures, but what caught Eliza's eye immediately was the dollhouse. It sat on a small table in the center of the room, covered in a thick layer of dust, its once bright paint faded and chipped. The dollhouse was large, intricately detailed, with tiny rooms furnished with delicate, miniature furniture. Inside, the tiny figures of dolls stood frozen in place, their lifelike faces eerily expressive, as though they had been caught mid-movement. Eliza felt a shiver run down her spine as she approached the dollhouse, her curiosity battling with a sense of unease. The dolls were unsettling in their stillness, their glassy eyes staring blankly ahead. But there was something about the dollhouse that drew her in, something that made her reach out and brush the dust from its roof. As her fingers touched the wood, she felt a faint vibration, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing through the dollhouse. Startled, she pulled her hand back, but the sensation lingered, tingling in her fingertips. The attic seemed to grow colder, the shadows lengthening as though they were alive, creeping closer to the dollhouse. Despite the chill, Eliza felt an inexplicable urge to open the dollhouse, to see what lay within. She lifted the roof with trembling hands, revealing the rooms inside. Each one was meticulously detailed, from the tiny, lace curtains to the miniature books on the shelves. The dolls were positioned throughout the house, some sitting at a dining table, others standing in the hallways. As Eliza peered closer, she noticed that each doll's face was frozen in an expression of fear or sorrow, their tiny hands raised as though in defense or supplication. A whisper, so faint she could barely hear it, brushed against her ear. "Help us, free us." Eliza jumped, looking around the attic, but she was alone. The whisper came again, this time clearer, more insistent. "Free us, we're trapped." She stared at the dollhouse, her heart pounding. The whispers seemed to be coming from the dolls, their voices soft and pleading. Eliza shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought as her imagination, but the whispers grew louder, filling her mind with their desperate pleas. Over the next few days, Eliza found herself returning to the attic again and again, drawn to the dollhouse despite the unease it stirred in her. She spent hours arranging and rearranging the rooms, moving the dolls from place to place, trying to make sense of the whispers that filled her mind. Each time she touched the dolls, the whispers grew clearer, more desperate. "They're lying to you," one voice whispered. "They want to trap you too." Another voice, soft and sorrowful, begged, "Please, help us, we're so cold." The more Eliza listened, the more the dollhouse seemed to change. The rooms, once pristine and orderly, became dark and twisted, the furniture broken and scattered, the walls stained with shadows that seemed to shift and move. The dolls, once frozen in fear, now seemed to follow her with their glassy eyes, their faces twisted in agony as they reached out to her. One night, Unable to sleep, Eliza crept back to the attic, the dollhouse calling to her with a pull she could no longer resist. As she opened the dollhouse, she noticed something different. The dolls were moving. At first, it was subtle, a hand twitching, a head turning slightly. But soon, the movement became more pronounced, the dolls acting out scenes within the tiny rooms. To her horror, Eliza realized that the scenes were reflections of her own life, dark, twisted versions of events that had happened, or were yet to happen. She watched as a doll, dressed in a tiny version of her own nightgown, stood at a miniature window, peering out into the darkness. Another doll, resembling her mother, lay in a tiny bed, her face contorted in pain as shadowy figures loomed over her. The whispers became frantic, overlapping in a cacophony of voices that filled the attic. "Break it. Destroy the dollhouse. It's too late, she's here." Eliza backed away from the dollhouse, her heart racing. She knew then that the dollhouse was cursed, a prison for the souls of the manor's previous inhabitants, each one forced to relive their darkest moments over and over again. The dolls were not just figures, they were the trapped souls of the dead, and the dollhouse was feeding on them, growing stronger with each passing day. Desperate to escape, Eliza grabbed a heavy book from one of the attic's dusty shelves and swung it at the dollhouse. The impact sent the tiny furniture flying, but the dollhouse itself remained intact. The whispers turned to screams, the dolls writhing in their tiny rooms, their movements frantic and terrified. Eliza struck the dollhouse again and again, but it was as though an invisible force was protecting it, keeping it whole. The attic seemed to close in around her, the walls darkening, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive. The whispers reached a fever pitch, a chorus of despair and fury that echoed in her mind. Suddenly, the dollhouse emitted a blinding light, and Eliza was thrown backward, crashing into the attic wall. She lay dazed, her vision swimming as the light engulfed the room. She tried to crawl away, but her limbs felt heavy, as though they were no longer her own. Through the light, she saw the dolls rising from the dollhouse, their tiny forms growing larger, more human-like. They stepped out of the dollhouse, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of pain and hatred. The largest of them, a doll with Eliza's own face, reached out to her, its glassy eyes reflecting the terror in her own. "No!" Eliza screamed, but it was too late. The doll grabbed her, pulling her towards the dollhouse, its grip cold and unyielding. The light grew brighter, swallowing her whole, until there was nothing but the blinding, suffocating light. When the light finally faded, the attic was silent once more. The dollhouse stood on its table, untouched and pristine, as though nothing had happened. The tiny rooms were once again perfectly arranged, the furniture in place, the dolls standing motionless in their positions. The next morning, the housekeeper climbed the stairs to the attic, her steps slow and weary. She pushed open the door and gasped at what she saw. There, in the center of the dollhouse, was a new doll, a tiny figure with Eliza's face, her expression frozen in an eternal scream of terror. The housekeeper backed away, her heart pounding. She had heard the stories of the cursed dollhouse, but she had never believed them until now. With trembling hands, she closed the attic door and locked it tight, praying that whatever darkness lay within would stay trapped forever. But deep inside the dollhouse, the new doll stood among the others, her tiny hands pressed against the glass walls of her prison. And in the silence of the attic, the faintest of whispers could still be heard, a soft, desperate plea that would go unanswered for all time. The abandoned ward. St. Mary's Hospital, once a place of healing, has been abandoned for years, left to decay after a series of mysterious deaths. The hospital's midnight ward, a wing dedicated to treating the mentally ill, is said to be cursed. The patients who were housed there spoke of dark figures lurking in the corners of their rooms, whispering terrible secrets. After several nurses and doctors went missing, the ward was sealed off, and the hospital eventually closed its doors for good. Zoe, a medical student with a penchant for the paranormal, learns about the hospital while researching urban legends. Intrigued by the stories, she convinces her friends to join her in exploring the midnight ward. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they break into the hospital one cold, foggy night, determined to uncover the truth. The hospital is a labyrinth of dark corridors and empty rooms, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay. The walls are lined with faded medical posters and broken equipment, remnants of the hospital's past. As they approach the sealed doors of the midnight ward, they notice a strange, metallic odor in the air. The doors are rusted shut, but with some effort, they manage to pry them open, revealing a long, narrow hallway lined with patient rooms. As they step inside, the temperature drops, and their breath becomes visible in the cold air. The hall is silent, save for the faint, echoing sound of footsteps that don't seem to belong to anyone in the group. The doors to the patient rooms are slightly ajar, and as they pass by, they feel as if they're being watched from the shadows within. In the center of the ward, they find the nurse's station, its desk covered in dusty files and old patient records. Zoe picks up a file labeled Patient 13 and begins to read, her eyes widening as she uncovers the details of the patient's treatment. The file speaks of violent episodes, of the patient claiming to see shadow people who spoke to him, telling him to do terrible things. The last entry mentions that Patient 13 vanished from his room one night, leaving behind nothing but a pool of blood and a message scrawled on the wall in crimson, "They're here." Suddenly, the lights flicker, and the group hears a low, guttural moan coming from one of the patient rooms. Zoe and her friends exchange nervous glances before cautiously approaching the room. The door creaks as they push it open, revealing a small, dimly lit space. In the corner, a figure huddles on the floor, its back turned to them. The figure rocks back and forth, muttering something under its breath. Zoe steps closer, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Are you okay?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure stops moving, and the room falls deathly silent. Slowly, it turns its head towards them, revealing a face twisted in agony, its eyes wide and bloodshot. The figure's mouth stretches into a grotesque grin as it whispers, "They're here." Before they can react, the lights go out completely, plunging them into darkness. The air is filled with the sound of scuttling feet and low, menacing whispers. Zoe fumbles for her flashlight, but when she turns it on, the beam reveals shadowy figures crawling along the walls and ceiling, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The figures are distorted, their limbs elongated and their faces devoid of features. Zoe and her friends scramble to escape, but the shadows close in, their whispers growing louder and more frantic. One by one, the shadows reach out, pulling them into the darkness. Zoe's flashlight flickers and dies, and she feels cold hands gripping her arms, dragging her into the abyss. When she wakes up, Zoe finds herself alone in one of the patient rooms, strapped to a bed. The room is bathed in a sickly green light, and the shadows are gone. She struggles against the restraints, but they hold tight. From the corner of her eye, she sees a figure standing in the doorway, Patient 13, his face now calm, his eyes clear. He smiles at her, a smile that sends chills down her spine. "You shouldn't have come here," he says, his voice calm and soothing. "Now you're one of us." Zoe's screams echo through the empty halls as the lights flicker once more and go out. The next morning, the authorities find the hospital's doors wide open, but there's no sign of Zoe or her friends. The midnight ward remains silent and still, its secrets buried in the darkness, waiting for the next curious soul to wander inside. House of the Seven Veils. Mara had always been fascinated by the occult, drawn to the dark and the forbidden like a moth to a flame. When she heard about the House of Seven Veils, she knew she had to see it for herself. The mansion was said to be the site of unspeakable rituals, where a secret society practiced ancient rites under the cover of night. But no one who entered the house ever came back to tell their tale. Undeterred by the warnings, Mara found herself standing before the house on a moonless night, her breath visible in the cold air. The mansion was hidden deep within the woods, its dark silhouette barely visible through the trees. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and the forest was unnaturally silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. The door creaked open as she approached, revealing a dark hallway lined with candles that flickered with a sickly green light. The walls were draped in heavy black fabric, giving the impression of a funeral shroud. As Mara stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her, and the temperature dropped. She could feel the presence of something ancient and malevolent watching her, waiting for her to make the first move. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps echoing through the empty house. The walls seemed to close in around her, the fabric whispering as she passed. She reached the end of the hallway and found herself in a circular room with 7 doors, each one draped in a different colored veil. A tall, hooded figure stood in the center of the room, its face hidden in shadow. "Welcome," the figure intoned, its voice low and filled with menace. "You have come seeking knowledge, have you not?" Mara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure gestured to the doors around her. "Each veil represents a path," it said. "But only one will lead you to the truth. Choose wisely." Mara hesitated, her eyes scanning the veils. There was something about the way they moved, as if they were alive, writhing and pulsing with a life of their own. She felt a sense of dread growing in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. She had come too far to turn back now. She reached out and pulled aside the veil closest to her, revealing a doorway that led into darkness. The hooded figure stepped back, its laughter echoing through the room as Mara stepped through the doorway, her fear mounting with each step. She found herself in a long, narrow corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one reflecting a distorted version of herself. As she walked, the reflections began to change, showing her as she would be if she had made different choices in life. In some, she was successful and happy, but in others, she was twisted and grotesque, her face a mask of pain and suffering. The corridor ended in a large chamber, where 7 hooded figures stood in a circle, chanting in a language that made Mara's skin crawl. In the center of the circle was a stone altar, and lying on the altar was a young woman, her eyes wide with terror. Mara recognized the woman from the mirror. She was herself, but from another time, another life. The figures turned to Mara, their chanting growing louder, more insistent. She tried to back away, but the door behind her had disappeared, leaving her trapped in the chamber. The hooded figures advanced on her, their hands reaching out to grab her, to drag her to the altar. Mara screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the darkness. She felt herself being lifted off the ground, her body laid out on the cold stone. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and Mara realized with horror that she was about to be sacrificed, her soul offered up to whatever dark god the cult worshipped. But just as the knife descended, the chamber exploded with light. The walls began to shake, the mirrors shattering into 1,000 pieces. The hooded figures screamed as they were pulled into the light, their bodies disintegrating before Mara's eyes. She felt herself being lifted up, carried away from the chamber, away from the house. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in the middle of the forest, the house of 7 veils nowhere in sight. The air was still, the night silent. She looked down at her hands, expecting to see blood, but they were clean. She had been spared, but at what cost? Mara stood up, her mind racing. The knowledge she had sought had come at a terrible price. The truth was more horrifying than she could have ever imagined. She knew now that the house was real, that the rituals were real. And she knew that the cult was still out there, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to seek them out. As she made her way back to the village, Mara vowed to never speak of what had happened, to bury the memory deep within her. But the darkness she had encountered would never leave her. It would follow her for the rest of her days, a constant reminder of the horrors that lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to consume those who dared to seek the truth. The Silent Circus. Every year, without warning or fanfare, a mysterious circus would appear on the outskirts of the small town of Eldridge. The townspeople never saw it arrive. One morning, the field that lay barren and empty the night before would be filled with tents of all shapes and sizes, towering rides that reached toward the sky, and a Ferris wheel that turned slowly and silently in the misty dawn. The circus was always shrouded in an eerie silence. No music, no laughter, no circus barkers calling out to entice visitors. Yet, despite its unsettling atmosphere, the people of Eldridge felt an irresistible pull to the strange and silent fair. Jordan was a boy who often felt invisible in his own life. At school, he was just another face in the crowd, his presence unnoticed by both teachers and classmates alike. At home, his parents were too busy with work and their own lives to pay him much attention. He spent most of his time alone, wandering the town streets or escaping into the pages of the books he loved. When the silent circus appeared on the outskirts of town one foggy night, Jordan felt that same pull, that same unexplainable urge to see what secrets the circus held. The fog was thick as he made his way to the field, its damp tendrils curling around him like ghostly fingers. The circus loomed before him, its tent stretching into the mist, the rides moving soundlessly as if operated by unseen hands. There were no lights, no signs of life, but Jordan was not afraid. He was too intrigued by the circus's strange, otherworldly presence to be afraid. As he wandered through the circus grounds, Jordan noticed that the attractions were unlike any he had ever seen. There were no traditional games or rides. Instead, the booths and tents seemed to offer something more personal, something darker. He passed by a mirror maze, its glass surfaces warped and clouded, showing reflections that didn't quite match his movements. There was a game where the prizes were not stuffed animals or toys, but objects that looked oddly familiar, belongings of the people of Eldridge, lost items that had vanished without a trace. And then there were the rides, their mechanisms hidden, the carts and swings moving with an unnatural smoothness, as if powered by some invisible force. Despite the eerie atmosphere, Jordan felt a strange sense of belonging. The circus seemed to know him, to understand the loneliness that had been his constant companion. It was as if the circus had been waiting for him, drawing him in with the promise of something he couldn't quite name. As he walked deeper into the circus, Jordan noticed a small, tattered tent set apart from the rest. A sign hung above the entrance, its letters faded and barely legible, "Fortunes Told." The tent seemed out of place, old and worn, with a sense of decay that contrasted sharply with the pristine, if silent, splendor of the rest of the circus. Yet, as Jordan approached, the flap of the tent rustled, and he felt a beckoning pull, urging him to step inside. He hesitated for only a moment before pushing aside the flap and entering the dimly lit space. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense, and the light from a single flickering candle cast long shadows on the walls. At the center of the tent sat a woman, her face obscured by a hood, her hands resting on a small, round table draped in a faded velvet cloth. Her fingers, long and thin, were adorned with rings that caught the candlelight, glinting like tiny, trapped stars. Jordan swallowed hard, suddenly unsure of why he had come. The woman lifted her head slightly, revealing just a glimpse of her face, a sharp chin, pale lips, and eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. She gestured for him to sit, and though every instinct told him to run, Jordan found himself compelled to obey. "Welcome, Jordan," the woman said, her voice soft and melodic, yet tinged with something cold and distant. "I've been expecting you." Jordan's breath caught in his throat. How did she know his name? Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "I am the keeper of the silent circus," she replied. "The guardian of its secrets, and the bearer of its curse." "See curse?" Jordan stammered, his fear mounting. The fortune teller nodded slowly. "This circus is not what it seems. It is a trap, a place where the souls of the lost and forgotten are collected. Each attraction is designed to ensnare a different type of person, feeding on their fears and desires until they are consumed. The circus takes what it wants, and it never lets go." Jordan's heart pounded in his chest. He had heard stories about people who had gone missing after visiting the silent circus, but he had never believed them, until now. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because," the woman said, her voice growing softer, more sorrowful, "I am a prisoner of this place, bound to the circus until I can find someone to take my place. I have been here for longer than I can remember, trapped in a cycle that never ends. And now, Jordan, the circus has chosen you." Jordan's blood ran cold. He wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but he could feel the circus's pull tightening around him, binding him to this place. "There must be a way out," he pleaded. "I don't want to be trapped here." The fortune teller's eyes darkened, and she sighed heavily. "There is a way," she said, "but it comes at a cost. You can take my place, become the new guardian of the circus, and I will be free. But if you choose to leave, the circus will consume you, body and soul, and you will become a part of it forever." Jordan's mind raced. He could feel the circus closing in on him, its silent attractions coming to life, their unseen mechanisms whirring and clicking as they prepared to ensnare him. He had to choose, and quickly. The fortune teller's gaze bore into him, her eyes pleading. "Please, Jordan," she whispered. "I have been here for so long. I don't want to be here anymore. Let me go." The weight of the decision crushed him, but he knew what he had to do. He couldn't leave her here, trapped for eternity in this nightmare. He couldn't condemn her to a fate he couldn't bear himself. "I'll do it," Jordan said, his voice shaking. "I'll take your place." The fortune teller's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she smiled, a sad, weary smile. "Thank you," she whispered. She reached out and took his hands in hers, her touch as cold as ice. "You have given me a gift I can never repay." As soon as the words left her lips, Jordan felt the change begin. The air around him grew heavy, the shadows in the tent lengthening, twisting around him like vines. His body felt weightless, as if he were floating, drifting away from himself. He could feel the circus power seeping into him, filling him with its ancient, dark magic. The fortune teller began to fade, her form dissolving into the shadows. "Goodbye, Jordan," she said, her voice echoing in the darkness. "Anne. I'm sorry." With that, she was gone, and Jordan was left alone in the tent, the candle flickering weakly on the table. The silence of the circus pressed in on him, more oppressive than ever before. He could feel it now, the truth of what he had become. He was the new guardian, the keeper of the silent circus, bound to its endless, eerie cycle. The tent flap rustled, and Jordan knew that the circus was already preparing for its next visitor, its next victim. The attractions outside were waiting, hungry for the souls of the lost and forgotten. And Jordan, now the keeper of the circus secrets, would be there to greet them. The next morning, the people of Eldridge woke to find the field empty once more, the circus gone as mysteriously as it had appeared. They went about their day, unaware of the new guardian who watched over the silent circus, waiting for the next soul to wander into its grasp. And deep in the shadows, Jordan stood, his existence now tied to the circus, waiting for the cycle to begin again. The House of Echoes. On the outskirts of a forgotten town lies a mansion known only as the House of Echoes. Abandoned for decades, the mansion is a decaying relic of a bygone era, its once grand facade now overtaken by ivy and rot. The townsfolk avoid it, speaking in hushed whispers of the terrible events that transpired there, a family, slaughtered in their beds, with no sign of the killer. Some say the house itself was cursed, a beacon for restless spirits. No one has dared to enter the mansion in years, but there are always rumors, lights flickering in the windows, shadows moving behind the cracked glass, and the faint sound of voices, carried on the wind. Lucas, a young man fascinated by the paranormal, decides to investigate the mansion. He's heard the stories all his life and is determined to uncover the truth behind the House of Echoes. Armed with only a flashlight, a notebook, and his camera, Lucas arrives at the mansion just as the sun begins to set. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the wind whispers through the trees, as if warning him to turn back. But Lucas is undeterred. He pushes open the rusted iron gate, its hinges groaning in protest, and steps onto the overgrown path leading to the front door. The mansion looms before him, its windows dark and empty, like the hollow eyes of a skull. He takes a deep breath and pushes open the door, the wood creaking loudly as it swings inward. Inside, the air is cold and heavy, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and dust-covered portraits. The floorboards creak beneath Lucas's feet as he moves through the foyer, his flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. He can feel the weight of the house pressing down on him, as if the very walls are alive, watching his every move. He begins his investigation, taking photos and notes as he explores the first floor. The rooms are filled with decaying furniture, cobwebs hanging like tattered curtains in the corners. But it's the silence that unnerves him the most, an oppressive, unnatural silence that seems to swallow every sound. As Lucas climbs the grand staircase to the second floor, he hears something, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, like the distant echo of voices. He freezes, listening intently, and there it is again, whispers, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. His heart pounds in his chest as he follows the sound, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. The hallway at the top of the stairs is lined with doors, each one leading to a different bedroom. The whispers seem to be coming from the end of the hall, from the last door on the right. Lucas approaches slowly, his flashlight flickering as if struggling to stay lit. The air grows colder with each step, his breath visible in the dim light. He reaches the door and hesitates, his hand trembling as he reaches for the doorknob. The whispers are loud now, a cacophony of voices all speaking at once, their words unintelligible but filled with an unmistakable sense of dread. He pushes the door open, and the whispers stop abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. The room beyond is a bedroom, untouched by time. The bed is neatly made, the furniture undisturbed, but the air is thick with a sense of unease. Lucas steps inside, his flashlight sweeping across the room, and that's when he sees it, a figure standing in the corner, shrouded in darkness. The figure is tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows. But as Lucas's flashlight flickers, he catches a glimpse of its face, pale, hollow-eyed, with a mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. The figure steps forward, and Lucas realizes with horror that it's not walking, but gliding, its feet never touching the ground. The whispers return, louder now, filling the room with a maddening chorus of voices. The figure raises its hand, pointing directly at Lucas, and he feels a cold, suffocating presence envelop him. He tries to move, to run, but his body is frozen, paralyzed by an unseen force. As the figure moves closer, Lucas feels his mind slipping, his thoughts growing fragmented and confused. The whispers are inside his head now, drowning out his own thoughts, filling him with a sense of overwhelming dread. The figure reaches out, its cold fingers brushing against his forehead, and in that moment, Lucas sees everything, the murders, the blood-soaked walls, the terror that consumed the family in their final moments. The figure's grin widens, and Lucas realizes with a sickening jolt that it's feeding on his fear, drawing strength from his terror. He struggles to break free, but it's no use, the figure's grip tightens, and he feels his soul being pulled from his body, drawn into the darkness that surrounds him. And then, just as suddenly, it's over. The figure releases him, and Lucas collapses to the floor, gasping for breath. The whispers fade, the room growing eerily silent once more. But something is different, Lucas can feel it. The house is no longer watching him, no longer pressing down on him. It's as if the house has taken what it wanted and is now satisfied. Lucas staggers to his feet, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. He stumbles out of the room, down the hallway, and out of the house, never once looking back. As he reaches the safety of the outside world, he takes a deep breath, the cold night air filling his lungs. But as he walks away from the house of echoes, he hears something, a faint whisper, carried on the wind, just at the edge of his hearing. He stops, his heart racing, and listens. The whisper is his own voice, echoing back to him from the darkness. And then, he understands. The house didn't just take his fear, it took a part of him, a fragment of his soul, leaving him forever bound to the cursed mansion. No matter where he goes, no matter how far he runs, he will never be free of the House of Echoes. For the house is alive, and it will always find a way to feed. The House on Black Hill. Alex had always been the skeptic in his village, a boy who scoffed at tales of the supernatural and the unknown. To him, the stories that the villagers whispered around campfires and during cold winter nights were nothing more than ghost stories meant to scare children. The one tale that intrigued him the most was that of the House on Black Hill, a dark, ominous structure perched on the hill that overlooked the village like a vulture waiting for its next meal. The villagers claimed the house was cursed, alive with the tortured souls of those who had dared to enter and never returned. It was said that the house fed on the fear of the living, consuming anyone foolish enough to step inside. For Alex, the legend was just that, a legend. So when his friends dared him to explore the house, he accepted without hesitation. The thought of proving everyone wrong excited him. He was going to be the one who would return from Black Hill unscathed, with a story of how he had conquered the fears that had held the village in thrall for generations. As dusk settled over the village, casting long shadows across the landscape, Alex made his way up Black Hill. The path was steep and winding, the air growing colder with each step. The house loomed ahead, an imposing silhouette against the darkening sky. Its windows were dark and empty, like lifeless eyes staring down at him, and its walls were covered in creeping ivy that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. When Alex reached the front door, he paused for a moment, taking in the eerie stillness that surrounded the house. The village below was far behind him now, the lights of home barely visible through the trees. He felt a twinge of unease but quickly pushed it aside. He had come this far, there was no turning back. He reached out and pushed the door open. It creaked on its rusted hinges, and as soon as he stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the walls. Alex spun around, but the door was now locked, the handle cold and unyielding under his hand. The air inside the house was thick and musty, filled with the scent of rot and decay. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath his feet, and the walls seemed to groan, as if the house were alive and aware of his presence. Undeterred, Alex moved deeper into the house. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the fading twilight that filtered through the grimy windows. Dust hung in the air, and cobwebs draped the corners like ancient curtains. As he walked, he began to hear strange noises, footsteps echoing down empty hallways, whispers that seemed to come from the very walls themselves, and the soft, scraping sound of something dragging along the floor. The house seemed to shift around him, the layout changing as he moved from room to room. Hallways that should have led back to the entrance instead twisted and turned into unfamiliar corridors. Doors that had been open moments before were now sealed shut, and new doorways appeared where there had been none. It was as if the house were a living, breathing creature, trapping him within its labyrinthine interior. As the hours wore on, Alex's confidence began to wane. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the house itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The walls trembled and groaned, the floor beneath him vibrating with a rhythmic thrum that matched his own racing heartbeat. The house was feeding on his fear, drawing strength from his growing sense of dread. Finally, Alex found a staircase leading down to the basement. He hesitated at the top of the stairs, peering into the darkness below. The air that wafted up from the basement was damp and cold, carrying with it the faint stench of decay. He knew that whatever secrets the house held, they were hidden in the depths below. With a deep breath, Alex descended the staircase. The steps creaked under his weight, and the further down he went, the colder the air became. He reached the bottom and found himself in a large, cavernous room. The walls were slick with moisture, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of slimy, black sludge. It was then that he felt it, a cold, slimy tendril brushing against his leg. He looked down in horror to see the floor itself beginning to move, the sludge writhing and coiling like living flesh. Panic surged through him, and he turned to flee, but the floor beneath him split open, revealing a gaping maw lined with sharp, jagged teeth. The walls around him trembled, the flesh-like material pulsing with a sickening rhythm. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness as the maw closed around him, dragging him down into the depths of the house. The house consumed him, absorbing him into its structure, his body becoming one with the walls and floors. His screams joined the chorus of voices that echoed through the house, a cacophony of tortured souls forever trapped within its living, breathing confines. The next morning, the house on Black Hill stood silent and still, its windows dark and empty. The villagers, unaware of what had transpired, continued to live in fear of the house, its curse remaining unbroken. And the house waited, its hunger sated for now, but always ready to claim its next victim. The Hollow Eyes. In the village of Pine Haven, nestled on the edge of a dense, foreboding forest, the nights were long, and the shadows seemed to whisper secrets that no one dared to speak aloud. The villagers lived in constant fear of the woods, for they knew the stories, tales of dark spirits and ghostly apparitions with hollow, empty sockets where their eyes should be. These specters, known as the Hollow Eyes, were said to be the souls of those who had died within the forest, their eyes stolen by the malevolent forces that lurked among the ancient trees. The elders warned the young never to venture too close to the forest, especially after dusk, when the Hollow Eyes were said to roam freely, searching for souls to drag into the darkness. But Anna, a girl of fierce curiosity and unyielding courage, was not like the others. She had heard the tales of the Hollow Eyes all her life, whispered around the hearth during long winter nights, but she refused to believe them. To her, they were just stories, meant to keep children from straying too far from home. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees and the sky blazed with the fiery colors of twilight, Anna made up her mind. She would prove to the villagers that the stories were nothing more than myths. With a lantern in hand, she slipped out of her home, her footsteps quiet on the worn path that led to the edge of the forest. The air grew colder as she approached the tree line, the towering pines casting long, dark shadows across the ground. The forest loomed before her, a wall of darkness that seemed to breathe and pulse with an unseen life. For a moment, Anna hesitated, her heart fluttering with a flicker of fear. But she pushed it aside, lifting her lantern high and stepping boldly into the woods. The trees closed in around her, their branches intertwining above her head like the twisted fingers of ancient giants. The further she went, the more oppressive the air became, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The light from her lantern flickered, casting weak beams that barely penetrated the darkness. The shadows seemed to shift and move at the edges of her vision, but whenever she turned to look, there was nothing there. As night fell, the forest grew darker, the world around her consumed by the inky blackness. Anna's footsteps were the only sound, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots a hollow echo in the stillness. But soon, even that was drowned out by a faint, whispering sound, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from all directions at once. Anna. The trees closed in around her, their branches intertwining above her head like the twisted fingers of ancient giants. The further she went, the more oppressive the air became, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The light from her lantern flickered, casting weak beams that barely penetrated the darkness. The shadows seemed to shift and move at the edges of her vision, but whenever she turned to look, there was nothing there. As night fell, the forest grew darker, the world around her consumed by the inky blackness. Anna's footsteps were the only sound, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots a hollow echo in the stillness. But soon, even that was drowned out by a faint, whispering sound, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from all directions at once. Anna. She froze, her blood running cold as the voices called her name, soft and insistent. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the forest itself was speaking to her, urging her to go deeper, to find what lay hidden in the darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to keep moving, her grip tightening on the lantern's handle. The hollow eyes drew closer, their cold, ethereal fingers brushing against her skin, sending chills through her body. The light of her lantern flickered wildly, struggling against the encroaching darkness. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, until they were all she could hear, drowning out her thoughts, her fear, everything. The last thing Anna saw was the endless black voids where the ghost's eyes should have been, deep and empty, like the abyss itself. The light from her lantern went out, plunging her into darkness, and the cold fingers of the hollow eyes wrapped around her, pulling her into the void. The next morning, when the villagers ventured to the edge of the forest, they found Anna lying on the ground, her body still and cold. Her lantern was beside her, its glass cracked and its flame extinguished. But it was her eyes that horrified them most. Her once bright eyes were gone, replaced by hollow, black voids, as if they had been carved out by some unseen hand. The villagers buried Anna that day, their hearts heavy with sorrow and fear. They spoke of the hollow eyes in hushed voices, their belief in the old tales now unshakable. They knew that Anna's spirit had been claimed by the forest, another lost soul to wander the woods with empty sockets, searching for someone to take her place. And on dark, foggy nights, when the wind howled through the trees and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, the villagers would lock their doors and pray that they would never see the hollow eyes, those ghostly apparitions with their terrible, empty stares. For to look into those hollow voids was to lose oneself to the darkness, to be claimed by the spirits of the forest, and to become another of the lost souls that haunted the woods forever. The hunger of the Wendigo. In the cold, desolate wilderness of the northern forests, there is a legend whispered among the hunters and trappers, an ancient creature that stalks the snowy woods, driven by an insatiable hunger. The Wendigo, they say, is a spirit of famine and greed, a monster born from the darkest corners of the human soul. Those who encounter it are doomed to become like it, forever cursed to hunger for the flesh of their own kind. Elias, a seasoned hunter who has spent years in the wilderness, hears the tales of the Wendigo from the elders of a nearby indigenous village. He dismisses the stories as mere superstition, but the fear in their eyes lingers in his mind. One winter, when the snow lies thick on the ground and the cold bites deep, Elias and his hunting party venture deep into the forest in search of game. But as the days pass, the forest remains silent, no tracks in the snow, no signs of life, only the howling wind and the creaking of frozen trees. Desperate to return with food, the party presses on, but the cold and hunger begin to take their toll. One night, as they huddle around a weak fire, they hear a distant, mournful cry echoing through the trees, a sound like the wail of a lost soul. The men exchange uneasy glances, but Elias brushes it off as the wind. Still, he can't shake the feeling that something is watching them from the darkness, something that is neither man nor beast. As the nights grow colder and the food runs out, the men's spirits begin to break. One by one, they fall ill, their faces gaunt and pale, their eyes hollow with hunger. Elias feels the same gnawing emptiness in his own belly, a hunger that no amount of food can satisfy. One night, he wakes to find one of the men missing. Following the tracks in the snow, he stumbles upon a gruesome scene, the man's body torn apart, the snow around him stained with blood. Standing over the remains is a figure, tall and emaciated, its skin stretched tight over its bones, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The Wendigo stares at Elias with eyes that burn with a cold, cruel intelligence. Its mouth, filled with sharp, jagged teeth, twists into a grotesque smile. Elias tries to run, but the creature is upon him in an instant, its breath hot and rancid on his neck. It whispers to him in a voice like the rustling of dead leaves, telling him that the hunger will never leave him, that he will become like it, a creature of endless appetite. Elias manages to escape, but the damage is done. He returns to the camp, but his mind is plagued by the Wendigo's curse. The hunger inside him grows stronger with each passing day, until he can no longer resist its pull. One night, driven mad by the hunger, Elias turns on the last remaining member of his party, tearing into him with a savagery that horrifies even himself. As he consumes the flesh, he feels his humanity slipping away, replaced by something cold and monstrous. By the time he is found by a search party weeks later, Elias is no longer the man they once knew. His eyes are wild and hollow, his body gaunt and twisted, his hands stained with blood. They take him back to the village, but he is beyond saving. The curse of the Wendigo has taken hold, and Elias disappears into the night, leaving behind only the echoes of his hunger and the cold wind that whispers through the trees. The villagers know that he has become one of them, a Wendigo, doomed to roam the wilderness, hunting and devouring all who cross his path. The Witch's Mask. In a town known for its elaborate Halloween celebrations, there's a particular tradition that everyone follows: a mask contest. Every year, the townspeople craft intricate masks, each one more horrifying than the last, to wear during the Halloween festivities. But there's one mask that is never worn, a mask locked away in the town's museum, said to have belonged to a powerful witch who once cursed the town. Avery, an artist with a fascination for the macabre, is determined to win this year's mask contest. She's heard the stories about the witch's mask, a grotesque creation made of human bone and animal hide, with a face twisted into a permanent sneer. The legend goes that the witch crafted the mask herself, infusing it with dark magic, and anyone who wears it will gain unimaginable power at the cost of their soul. Despite the warnings, Avery decides to steal the mask from the museum, believing that it will give her the edge she needs to win the contest. Late one night, she breaks into the museum and finds the mask displayed in a glass case, its hollow eyes seeming to stare back at her. With trembling hands, she lifts the mask from its stand, feeling an odd warmth emanating from the cold material. As Avery places the mask on her face, she feels a surge of power unlike anything she's ever experienced. Her vision sharpens, and she can hear the faint whispers of the spirits that dwell within the mask. She rushes home, eager to finish her costume and prepare for the contest, but as she works, she begins to notice strange things happening. Her reflection in the mirror looks different, her eyes darker, her skin paler, her expression more sinister. The mask, once so beautiful in its grotesque detail, now seems to be merging with her skin, the edges disappearing as if becoming part of her face. Avery tries to remove the mask, but it won't budge, its grip on her tightening with every attempt. On the night of the contest, Avery arrives at the town square, the mask now fully fused with her face. The townspeople gasp in horror at her appearance, but Avery feels nothing but exhilaration. She steps onto the stage, ready to claim her victory, but as the clock strikes midnight, the mask begins to change. The twisted sneer on the mask's face becomes Avery's own, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The whispers in her head grow louder, drowning out all other thoughts as the mask's true power takes hold. The spirits of the witch's victims, trapped within the mask for centuries, now possess Avery, using her body as a vessel to exact their revenge. Avery's body contorts and twists, her hands clawing at the air as the spirits force her to enact the witch's final curse. The townspeople scream as they feel an invisible force tightening around their throats, choking the life from them one by one. The mask, now fully alive, feeds on their fear and pain, growing stronger with every soul it consumes. By dawn, the town is silent, its streets littered with the bodies of the dead. The mask lies on the ground, its features now serene and lifeless, waiting for the next foolish soul to don it. The museum is left untouched, but the mask is never returned, its dark legacy continuing to haunt the town for generations to come. The Grinning Man. In the quaint, peaceful town of Willow Creek, where everyone knew each other and nothing unusual ever happened, there was a story that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. The tale was of the Grinning Man, a sinister figure who appeared only at night, his face twisted into a grotesque, permanent smile. The Grinning Man was said to haunt the streets, peering into windows with wide, unblinking eyes, spreading fear wherever he went. Most dismissed the legend as a mere ghost story, something to frighten children and entertain the bored. But for those who claimed to have seen him, the memory of that twisted grin was something they could never forget. Sarah was one of the few in Willow Creek who had no time for ghost stories. A strong-willed and independent girl, she had always been brave, often scoffing at the town's superstitions. The Grinning Man was just another tall tale, she thought, something invented to keep kids from staying out too late. But one cold, moonlit night, as she was walking home from a friend's house, Sarah's skepticism would be tested. The night was still, the streets eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant bark of a dog breaking the silence. As Sarah walked, she felt a slight chill, but she brushed it off, tightening her coat around her. It was then, out of the corner of her eye, that she caught a glimpse of something, a figure standing in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the street lamp's light. She stopped, her heart skipping a beat, and turned her head to get a better look. There, half hidden by the darkness, stood a tall, thin man. His face was obscured by the shadows, but something about the way he stood, so still, so unnervingly rigid, made her blood run cold. He was watching her, she could feel it. But he didn't move. For a moment, Sarah considered calling out to him, but something deep inside her, a primal instinct, told her to keep walking. She quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing in the quiet streets, and as she did, she heard it, a soft shuffling behind her. Sarah's pulse quickened, a sense of unease gnawing at her. She stole a glance over her shoulder, and there he was, still following her. The figure's movements were slow, deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. She could see more of him now, the pale skin, the lanky frame, and the way his head tilted slightly to one side, as if curious. But it was his face that made her breath catch in her throat. Even from a distance, she could see the faint outline of a smile that seemed too wide, too unnatural. Panic set in as Sarah neared her house. She broke into a run, her footsteps pounding against the pavement, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. She didn't dare look back again, not until she reached her front door. With shaking hands, she fumbled with her keys, trying desperately to fit the right one into the lock. It felt like an eternity before she finally got the door open. She burst inside, slamming the door shut behind her, the loud bang echoing through the empty house. For a moment, she pressed her back against the door, her heart racing as she tried to calm herself. But then, as if drawn by some terrible curiosity, she slowly turned the lock, her hand trembling. Taking a deep breath, she peered through the peephole, her eye scanning the dark porch outside. At first, she saw nothing, just the empty street, the faint glow of the street lamp, and the stillness of the night. But then, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing just beyond the reach of the porch light, was the grinning man. He was closer now, his features clearer, and what she saw made her blood run cold. He was tall, unnaturally so, with a gaunt, skeletal frame. His skin was deathly pale, almost luminescent in the moonlight, and his eyes, wide, unblinking, were fixed on the door. But it was his smile that terrified her the most. It stretched across his face in a way that seemed impossible, as if his lips had been carved into a permanent, grotesque grin. And as she watched, that smile seemed to grow wider, more menacing, as if he knew she was watching him. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away from the door, her mind racing. She knew she had to do something, call for help, hide, anything, but she couldn't move. The terror that gripped her was paralyzing, rooting her to the spot as if she were in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Then, without warning, there was a soft, deliberate knock at the door, 3 slow, measured taps that echoed through the silent house. Sarah's blood ran cold. She stumbled backward, her hands clamped over her mouth to stifle a scream. The knock came again, followed by a low, raspy voice that seemed to seep through the walls. "Let me in, Sarah." The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it was enough to send a wave of terror crashing over her. How did he know her name? How could he know? Her mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but there was none. She backed away further, her eyes never leaving the door. And then, as if in a trance, she watched in horror as the doorknob slowly began to turn, the latch clicking softly as it was pushed open. The door creaked inward, revealing the dark silhouette of the grinning man standing on the threshold, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. But he didn't enter. Instead, he stood there, smiling that horrific smile, his head tilting slightly as he stared at her. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, and Sarah felt the air grow thick with a suffocating dread. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the grinning man stepped back into the shadows, his figure melting into the darkness. The door swung shut with a soft click, and the house fell silent once more. Sarah stood there, trembling, her mind reeling from what had just happened. But when she finally mustered the courage to check the door, she found it locked, just as she had left it. Had it all been a hallucination? A trick of the mind? But then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. On the floor, just inside the door, was a small piece of paper. With shaking hands, she picked it up, her breath catching in her throat as she read the words scrawled in red ink. "I'll see you again, Sarah. Keep smiling." The paper slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the ground as a deep, overwhelming fear took hold of her. She would never feel safe again, never walk the streets at night without looking over her shoulder, and she would never, ever forget the face of the grinning man. For she knew, deep down, that he was still out there, watching, waiting, and that one day, he would return.